Hello, thank you for joining us at this breakout session titled Medical Product Facility Inspections and COVID-19. What is the latest and what can industry expect moving forward? We're joined by speakers Kalah Auchincloss, Senior Vice President and Deputy General Counsel at Greenleaf Health, Inc., Elizabeth Miller, Assistant Commissioner for Medical Products and Tobacco at FDA ORA, Vipul Sheth, Vice President of Quality and Regulatory Compliance at Becton Dickinson & Co., and we're joined by our moderator, Jack Garvey, Managing Partner for Compliance Architects, LLC. Jack, please take it away.
Thank you, Daniel. I appreciate that. Okay, in today's session, we're going to have a short speaker presentations followed by 2 quick survey questions and a panel discussion with question and answer. So I think it's going to be a great afternoon. In a moment, I'm going to introduce our speakers, but first allow me to frame today's discussion. As has been mentioned by virtually all of our speakers to date, the last approximately 12 to 14 months have been some of the most challenging in our nation's history. Nowhere was this challenge greater than with the FDA itself, as with all health authorities and related agencies within the broader life sciences industry. It's humbling to me to consider how fortunate I have been personally to be involved with the FDA-regulated community during this critical period, and to watch how life sciences companies, regulator entities, and individuals came together to work the problem our country faced, and in not much more than a year to attain a sense of control with this difficult virus. In the context of our discussion today on FDA inspections starting in early 2020, FDA faced the difficult challenge of having to both reprioritize and redirect limited resources and to figure out how to effectuate the inspection process or some adequate proxy thereof to continue to achieve FDA's core mission of protecting public health while also protecting its investigators and regulated company personnel. Over the last 12 months or so, I was involved in a couple of webinars, discussing many of these topics, including what was happening with the inspectorate within regulated companies, what the inspection conduct options were for FDA, and what might industry expect. Throughout this highly unusual period, inspection volumes dropped. Civil and criminal actions against bad actor companies were significantly reduced. Industry became aware of and possibly became familiar with FDA's 704A4 records requests, and at least one even received a warning letter based on one. We started talking about virtual inspections. Industry, through a collection of trade organizations, formally petitioned FDA to act quickly to embrace virtual inspections. We heard that FDA was working on guidance, and we speculated when FDA would release it. And we all wondered when FDA inspections would return to normal. On April 14th, just a few weeks ago, FDA did finally release the long-awaited guidance, but it was not on virtual inspections. Instead, FDA's guidance introduced a new term into our lexicon, REIs, or remote interactive evaluations, or what could be called the non-inspection inspection. In one of yesterday's sessions, Ann Walsh of Hyman, Phelps and McNamara went through the pros and cons of REIs for FDA and industry. I've said to my colleagues and clients that I believe REIs are a double-edged sword for industry with many risks and possible downsides that may offset the benefits. To quote a phrase often attributed to Aesop's fables, be careful what you ask for, you just might get it. We will spend a good bit of time discussing REIs today. Also, just in the last few days, on May 5th, FDA released its resiliency roadmap for FDA inspectional oversight. This document, part inspectional process primer, part marketing brochure, and part dashboard report, outlines FDA's state of the state with respect to its inspectional oversight activities in this latter phase of the pandemic emergency, as FDA anticipates a normal return to operations. The resiliency roadmap walks through FDA inspections during the pandemic, including mission-critical and prioritized inspections, along with FDA's use of alternative tools for oversight. It also provided FDA's report card on numbers on the state of inspection conduct by inspection type. Finally, it frames the roadmap going forward, FDA's approach on continuing oversight during the remainder of the pandemic emergency, and characterizing inspection tiers into Tier 1 mission critical, Tier 2 higher priority, and Tier 3 lower priority. Finally, this critical document also outlined 3 scenarios, best case, base case, and worst case scenarios for FDA to return to standard operations. I'm thrilled to be here with this distinguished panel today to discuss these important topics. Each of the panel members after this will deliver a short presentation, and then we'll have a, I'm sure, spirited panel discussion. Elizabeth?
Hey, good afternoon, and thank you, Jack, for that introduction. And thank you to the Food Drug Law Institute for the annual conference and specifically for hosting this panel today. As you noted, I'm Elizabeth Miller, the Assistant Commissioner for Medical Products and Tobacco Operations. I returned to the agency 14 months ago and am honored to be leading the inspections program of our biologics products, bioresearch monitoring, medical devices, and radiologic health, pharmaceutical, and tobacco operations. I'm honored to be with you today with so many of my esteemed colleagues, and particularly to represent FDA's Office of Regulatory Affairs. To say it's been an extraordinary time to be at FDA is a grave understatement. Despite many challenges and constraints, it's been fantastic to be back at the agency and to see the heroic efforts and innovative solutions that our mission-driven workforce has brought to this public health emergency. This was a time like no other for both FDA and industry. Today, I'm pleased to share with you some of the novel approaches we have developed and implemented to continue our commitment for upholding our mandate to protect and promote the public health and ensure that the products we regulate are safe, effective, and quality for patients and consumers. Despite confronting the unprecedented global pandemic, FDA continues conducting mission-critical inspections and has effectively implemented a risk-based approach to inspections. As you noted, last week, we released the Resiliency Roadmap for FDA Inspectional Oversight, a report outlining the agency's inspectional activities during the pandemic. While FDA continued many of our oversight activities, the public health emergency has impacted our usual inspectional operations, and the report was compiled in the spirit of transparency. It details a plan and key priority areas that focus on ensuring a consistent state of operations for the FDA to provide the American public with timely access to safe, quality FDA-regulated products. This unprecedented public health emergency required us to rework our business operations so that we can carry out our mission while protecting our workforce and the workforces of those we regulate, as well as to adhere to public health principles to mitigate the spread of the virus through limitation of unnecessary travel and contact. Over the past year, our approach has been risk-based and it's been deliberate. Slide 4, I'm sorry, I've been neglecting to mention the slides. In March 2020, like the majority of the world, we had to adapt our operations. We made the decision to postpone routine foreign and domestic inspection. Again, mission-critical work was assigned and it was accomplished in almost every situation. While the majority of our mission-critical inspections have been domestic, we have conducted foreign mission-critical inspections in nearly 30 countries. And this has not been without tremendous efforts to mitigate risks to our investigators and has entailed tremendous fortitude on their part. Many have had to quarantine and test multiple times. They've had to be in quarantine for up to 14 days, sometimes in military housing, and in some cases were not able to freely move out of their rooms and had to have their meals brought to the rooms. In July of 2020, we resumed prioritized domestic inspections. We were able to do this using data. FDA developed an advisory tool as one factor to help us determine when and where it was safest to conduct prioritized domestic inspections. This resulted in the COVID-19 advisory rating system, which uses real-time data to qualitatively assess the number of cases in a local area based on state and national data, including metrics on the phase of the state, as well as information to gauge the current trend and intensity of infection in counties. Another significant change is that we are generally pre-announcing all of our inspections. The purpose of this pre-announcement is to determine the public health safety protocols at the facility site. At times, we have found the incidence of COVID-19 has changed from the time of pre-announcement, and we've had to cancel or postpone inspections or sample collections. So use of this advisory label in concert with the facility information has allowed us to identify where it's safely to conduct regulatory activities in given geographical regions. And as noted, inspections will always be an essential part of how we evaluate operations to verify manufacturers maintain current good manufacturing practices. But we have learned through this public health emergency the inherent value in using multiple tools and authorities available to us, as well as the need to develop new tools to provide additional regulatory information. We've maintained oversight of our regulated industry by coupling on-site work with fully utilizing our authorities and authorities mimicking those of other authorities as a voluntary assessment of facilities where we do not have explicit authority. And as you noted, Jack, in April 2021, we published the guidance on remote interactive evaluation. Although the guidance mentions drugs and BIMO, we are applying these concepts to our non-biologic drug program, as well as medical device and tobacco program areas as well. Moving to slide 5. Despite the challenges during the last months, the agency continues to strive to meet inspection, surveillance, and compliance mandates. On the medical product side, over a one-year period from March 2020 to March 2021, we have completed 475 mission-critical inspections. As for the domestic prioritized inspection over that same one-year period, our medical products programs completed a total of 266 inspections. Adaptations include robustly using authorities and tools such as record requests, leveraging information from our trusted regulatory partners, and remote interactive evaluation. As you know, in our drug and biologic programs, we have the 704A4 authority to request records in advance of or in lieu of inspections. And although we've had that authority since 2012, during the pandemic, we have embraced and implemented it broadly. The implementation during the pandemic resulted in over 482 704A4 record requests in the biologics program, with an equally impressive 1,300 records requests in pharma. As mentioned, this authority applies to human drugs and biologics. We are using this authority for pre-approval inspections, for surveillance inspections, and also for following up and doing for cause and defect follow-ups. And I want to make a point to address the concept of what everybody is terming backlog for surveillance work. As everyone knows, in our medical products program, we have the ability to schedule our surveillance work based upon risk-informed models. Between records requests as well as on-site inspectional work, we were able to complete all of the firms that were identified in the 2020 surveillance list and assess them. Moving to slide 6, I just want to cover at a very high level some of the statutory context of drug inspections. As 510H reads, we shall inspect drug manufacturing facilities. This would apply to the extension of manufacturing facility contract labs, contract sterilizers, and packaging facilities. Although the Public Health Service Act does not explicitly require inspection of facilities, so we can use alternatives to inspect and evaluate operation in these facilities. Section 704A1 reads that we can review anything bearing whether a drug is adulterated or misbranded, except financial information at establishments in which a product is manufactured, processed, packaged, or held. And then moving to 704A4, this is where we can request the records in lieu of or advance of. And as mentioned earlier, this section applies to drug and biologic drugs, and the authority does not extend to remote interactions. I'm going to move on to slide 8. In the essence of time, I'm not going to cover the details of record requests under 704A4, other than to note that records are assessed when they're received using our compliance programs as a guide to evaluate that information that describes practices and process, see if they comply with U.S. current good manufacturing product regulations. Findings include any noted discrepancies or concerns, and outcomes from these are documented in our internal assistance. And those outcomes are categorized into 3 ways: either no need for follow-up, items intended for follow-up will be done on the next inspection, or they are referred to compliance for enforcement or administrative action consideration. Currently, the feedback is conveyed verbally to the establishments and in the case of pre-approval, that feedback is conveyed in writing. So moving to slide 8, as mentioned, 704A4 is records requests. But when we have interactions with firms, sometimes that is outside of requesting records. Remote interaction is an evaluation that means things like teleconferences, live streaming video of facility operations, recording facility operations, screen sharing, exchanging records real time. In other words, we're asking firms to create or do something other than to produce a document that they're required to maintain. And these activities, because we don't have the explicit authority, are considered a voluntary, and a facility is not obliged to participate in a request for a remote interactive evaluation. So in slide 9, on April 14th, we published that RIE guidance. The purpose was to clarify for regulated facilities how we will request and conduct REIs as we move through the public health emergency when travel restrictions impede on-site work. But I do want to note we foresee this being another tool in our investigators' toolbox moving through to and beyond the public health emergency. I want to be clear that these remote evaluations will never replace an inspection, and there will be situations where an inspection is an absolute must based on the facility's risk or history of compliance. In the guidance, you'll find sections on various planning types of assessment, from application-based, pre-approval and post-approval to surveillance and compliance follow-up, and also some considerations for bioresearch monitoring. And to move to slide 10, I just want to express a couple of things that, one, with this guidance, we want to emphasize firms should not request an RIE. FDA is identifying through risk-informed criteria which facilities will be asked to voluntarily participate in such an evaluation. FDA must host these evaluations using FDA systems such as Teams, Zoom, or Adobe Connect. FDA investigators will communicate with the facility about the details of the remote assessment or remote interactive evaluation that we will be scheduling. Most important, FDA will not issue a notice of inspection on FDA Form 482 and will not issue inspectional observations on an FDA 483. These are not inspections, as I mentioned earlier. They are considered remote interactive evaluations. So moving to slide 11, going forward, discussions are underway about potentially posting for transparency information about remote assessments that have been completed, including remote interactive evaluation. In addition, more work is underway for video-enhanced remote evaluations. I just want to mention quickly that the pandemic has emphasized how essential collaboration and agreements with our other trusted foreign counterpart and regulators are. As you recall, in December of 2019, FDA and the EU announced that the MRA, the Mutual Recognition Agreement, that was implemented in November 2017 for human pharmaceuticals was going to be expanded to include oversight of veterinary medicines. So those assessments of authorities have continued through the pandemic, and we now have 2 MRAs for human and vet pharmaceuticals, one in the EU and one in the UK. And we are working with other regulatory authorities to accomplish joint coordinated remote assessments. I know I've covered a lot of material, and I'll stop and I will turn the floor over to my fellow panelists. So thank you very much for your attention and for listening to me.
Elizabeth, thank you. And I have to apologize. I did not do introductions, and I think that is a fundamental error of a moderator. So if I could take the panel, the podium back for one quick second to do introductions, and please accept my apologies. I'm going to start with you, Elizabeth, since you started, and then our next presentation will be Kalah. And Elizabeth Miller is FDA Assistant Commissioner for Medical Products and Tobacco Operations. She rejoined FDA in March of 2020 from U.S. Pharmacopoeia, and in Elizabeth's current role with FDA, Dr. Miller provides leadership and managerial direction to ORA's Office of Biologics Products Operations, Office of Pharmaceutical Quality Operations, Office of Medical Device and Radiological Health Operations, Office of Bioresearch Monitoring Operations, and the Tobacco Operations staff. At USP, Dr. Miller helped guide USP's working relationships with the FDA. In her prior role with FDA, Dr. Miller worked with CDER in the Office of Unapproved Drugs and Labeling Compliance and on health fraud issues. Dr. Miller holds a bachelor's degree in biology from the Johns Hopkins University and received her Doctor of Pharmacy degree from the University of Maryland. And my apologies, Dr. Miller. Kalah Auchincloss is Executive Vice President, Regulatory Compliance and Deputy General Counsel at Greenleaf Health, where she advises pharmaceutical and medical device clients on compliance and policy matters. She has more than 15 years of food and drug legal policy and regulatory experience at FDA, on Capitol Hill, and in the private sector. Kalah spent 6 years at FDA, including as Deputy Chief of Staff for Commissioner Kalah. Kalah served in numerous other roles within FDA during her tenure there, including CDER's Office of Compliance. Before joining FDA, Kalah was an associate at the law firm Foley Hoag LLP and the firm's healthcare practice group. She holds a BA with honors from Williams College, a JD with honors from Georgetown University Law Center, and an MPH from Harvard University. Nikul Sheth is Vice President, Quality and Regulatory Compliance at BD, a leading global medical technology company headquartered in Franklin Lakes, New Jersey. The pool is also a member of the BD Senior Quality Leadership Team. Prior to BD, the pool served with Medtronic in VP level and business support roles for 20 years. Key Medtronic experiences include leading Covidion's integration into Medtronic, serving as secretary for the quality committee of the board, and commercializing many PMA devices, including combination products such as drug-eluting stents. The pool earned an MS degree in mechanical engineering from North Carolina State University in Raleigh. And finally, my name is Jack Garvey, the knucklehead that forgot introductions, and I'm the founder and managing partner of Compliance Architects, LLC. In this role, I act as the lead subject matter expert for the firm and advise pharmaceutical, medical device, biopharmaceutical, and other life science manufacturers on complex issues found at the intersection of law and regulation, business and operations, and quality and compliance. I have 34 years of hands-on technical, operational, quality, regulatory, and legal experience with leading life science companies, including Johnson & Johnson, Accenture, C.R. Bard, Ciba-Geigy, BASF Corporation, and Ayers Laboratories. I earned a Bachelor of Science degree in Chemical Engineering from Clarkson University and a Juris Doctor degree from Pace University School of Law, and am admitted to practice law in New York, New Jersey. With that, I think we can get back on track. And again, my apologies, Kalah.
Thanks, Jack. That was a lovely introduction. Elizabeth gave some great information about what FDA is up to. I'm going to spend just a little bit of time in the next few minutes taking it back up a level. I think everybody knows what's been going on for the last year or so, but I just want to set the stage and provide some context for why we have things like remote interactive evaluations and the need for that. I will also go through that guidance a little bit. Elizabeth gave some good highlights. I've got a couple more, and then talk about the resiliency roadmap that Jack also mentioned. And then some thoughts on what might be coming down the road in the future. Next slide, please. So this is the timeline that we're operating under. As everyone knows, last March, in the beginning of this pandemic, FDA suspended foreign and domestic on-site inspections for the safety of its employees and for those who are working at facilities, manufacturing facilities. They conducted only mission-critical work, both domestically and abroad. The agency resumed in July 2020 some prioritized inspections. Elizabeth mentioned the COVID-19 advisory level. That's sort of the basis upon which they determined whether it was safe to go and conduct particularly domestic inspections only that were not quite mission critical, but were still quite high priority. Jumping forward to January of 2021, a GAO report came out which had some data about what FDA had been doing over the last, at that point, 8 to 10 months during the pandemic, and sort of the status of inspections, the conduct of inspections. I think the findings from that report were really that there was a backlog of surveillance inspections, not necessarily other types of inspections, but a backlog of surveillance inspections that needed to be dealt with, and that FDA was going to have to look at that going forward. In April, so last month, we had the REI guidance that has been mentioned, and similar processes for devices and other commodities to which the 704A4 authority doesn't particularly apply. And then, of course, we had the resiliency roadmap in a couple of weeks ago that really talked about what FDA has done and what it plans to do going forward to close that surveillance backlog to the extent that it can. And during all of this time, FDA is clearly relying on alternative authorities and alternative tools, including, as Elizabeth mentioned, the 704A4 records requests, foreign authorities, and inspection reports from foreign authorities to the extent possible under the MRA and other information sharing agreements to achieve oversight of manufacturing facilities, even if they couldn't be kind of boots on the ground in those places. So next slide. So quick high-level context for where we are today. Foreign inspections are still only mission critical. China and India, they are being conducted by FDA personnel, but in-country staff, and that's likely quite limited at this point in India, given the state of affairs there with the case rates. But we're essentially operating in domestic only, except if there's a mission critical situation. Again, domestic inspections are only possible if the COVID-19 advisory level permits. That is probably changing as vaccine rates increase and the case rates go down, but there's, FDA is still relying on this COVID-19 advisory level for safety purposes. Priority inspections are still therefore the focus. The agency has done a great job of meeting user fee goal dates and doing follow-up on OAI and other high priority inspections. There is, as I mentioned, a backlog of surveillance inspections, which I think is what they've tried to focus on now, particularly with this resiliency roadmap, how to close that gap. There's the new process that has been discussed with interactive tools that can include video, remote meetings, and other things like that. And then there's the roadmap to go forward. How are they going to use the alternative tools, and how are they going to close this backlog? Next slide. So here's this guidance on remote interactive evaluations for drug manufacturers. Again, the guidance itself applies to drug and bioresearch monitoring facilities, not to devices and other commodities. But it sounds like FDA is using a similar process, just not in accordance with this particular guidance. So the RIE is a risk management tool, and FDA is using risk management tools to determine when to conduct an RIE. Again, as Elizabeth made clear, it's not something that sponsors can request. It's something that FDA determines on the basis of risk, and one factor there would be data integrity concerns. The guidance is pretty clear that for a facility that has had known data integrity concerns, that disqualifies you as a potential candidate for an RIE. It's applicable to all types of inspections, but it's not an inspection. Again, as Elizabeth mentioned, this is not the equivalent of an inspection. There's no Form 482. There's no Form 483. It's not the same thing as a quote unquote virtual inspection. It is another tool that FDA can use remotely to help assess the status of a facility. That being said, there are some things that are similar. The firm will get a written list of observations to the extent that there are observations at the close of the RIE. The firm will have an opportunity to respond if they so desire, and there will be issuance of remote interactive evaluation reports. So those are similar things to what would happen during an inspection, but again, not an inspection. The guidance also indicates that FDA is going to use existing inspection-related timelines for RIEs to the extent possible. Elizabeth said this as well. It's a voluntary process because, again, it's not an inspection, so it's voluntary. But of course, declining could impede FDA's ability to make a timely regulatory decision. So again, the agency's relying on information gotten from these remote interactive evaluations to assess risk and to make pre-approval and other decisions that it needs to make. So not participating, although a company has that option, may delay some of those decisions. Again, FDA expects that RIEs will help it operate within normal timeframes, particularly for higher priority activities. So I think RIEs will help them meet user fee commitments, which they've done a great job of doing to date, and hopefully will be able to continue to do, particularly with RIEs. And also update FDA's relevant internal databases. So because it's not an inspection, the external facing databases will not be updated, but the internal ones for risk purposes, RIEs can help inform those. Next slide. So turning to the resiliency roadmap, there was a little bit of data that Elizabeth provided, but just high level here on the state of inspections. The PAI, so pre-approval, sort of pre-market inspections of medical products, only 68 were delayed across all commodities. 48 were drug applications. And that's out of, in the report, there are about 13,000 submissions that the agency received. So low percentage of delayed applications. FDA's done a great job of actually meeting user fee goal dates as needed. In terms of for-cause inspections, there are about 115 that are remaining, 79 of which are related to drugs. The agency's planned 164, or had planned 164 for FY21. So you can do the math. There are a large number still remaining, but they have made some progress. And then we get to the surveillance category, and that's really where the majority have been delayed because the agency has been focusing on these high priority, mission critical for-cause and PAI pre-market instances. The roadmap lays out some of the scenarios to close the gap. If you listen to Judy McMeekin's speech this morning, she talked about that a little bit as well. But there are three, and Jack mentioned as well, there are three scenarios: the worst case scenario, the base case scenario, and the best case scenario. Even in the best case scenario, that surveillance gap and the backlog would only be reduced by about 50% given workload constraints and COVID restrictions that are likely to still be in place. So the resiliency roadmap includes a great table that helps the stakeholders understand kind of what's tier 1, what's tier 2, and what's tier 3 based on commodity. So I stuck up there human and animal drugs and biologics. There's also categories for devices, food, tobacco, depending on what commodity you are. But you can see that in general, tier 1, which is that mission critical category, includes things like PAI and for cause, things that are related to the COVID emergency, EUA products. Tier 2 is that next tier down, high priority still, but not quite mission critical. So again, a for cause that doesn't quite rise to the level of mission critical, a PAI that's not quite mission critical, and then we move to that lower category, and most of those post-approval inspections and routine surveillance inspections fall into that lower priority tier 3. Next slide. So looking forward a little bit to the future, we have the resiliency roadmap to quote unquote achieve a more consistent state of operations. FDA has indicated they're going to continue with risk-based measures to schedule inspections, but the focus is still really going to be on mission critical and high priority. The agency will conduct surveillance to the extent that workloads permit and that the COVID situation allows. So that could mean a much longer interval between non-priority surveillance inspections to achieve some of the gap closing. Clearly, the agency is going to continue to rely on some of these remote tools, including REIs and remote regulatory assessments. We may get some expanded views of those and some additional tools in the future. But even with all of this effort, the backlog of surveillance inspections will not be gone by the end of this fiscal year. FDA is still going to have to continue to contend with that backlog, including by using some of these remote tools and alternatives to inspection. So with that, I will turn it back to Jack and to the pool.
Thanks, Kalah. So I see that there are 102 participants online. I'm sure that everybody is looking to participate in the Q&A. So I'll go quick. I'll share my screen real quick here. Sorry, can you see my screen?
Not yet.
Okay, so I guess I'll provide the industry perspective. Working for Becton Dickinson, which is providing some critical products during this pandemic, right? Syringes and infusion sets and rapid, COVID tests. So what is the industry experience, especially for a multinational company with 80 plus facilities around the world? And my team kind of oversees the corporate audit program. So how do we, ourselves deal with auditing all of these facilities around the world and overseeing during this pandemic? It was only last year, right, 12 months ago that we've even started contemplating remote assessments, right, and then having notified body audits, over the last year. So, we've had a lot of experience. But when it comes to, regulators now, doing remote inspections, there's a lot of debate that goes on, and hence, there's so much interest, right? I'll tell you that we've had one RIE through the 4003 process and 3 requests for RRAs, over the last 3 months. And with every request, there is a lot of discussion that goes on about, when do we say yes, when do we say no, in a voluntary program. Well, what I want to share with you is kind of our experience, with our own corporate audit program. So in terms of challenges, what I've listed here is there are, in some cases, there are limited e-records, right? When you try to audit design controls and looking at design history files, there's a lot of documents that have to be scanned, for remote audits. It's also, we have to realize that, at least in the early part of the pandemic, many of the employees and most of the employees were working from home, right? So to even have the right people, working from home, having the right IT, technical capabilities, and having access to documents, was a challenge. So, that's one of the things that we realized. Time zone differences, right? When you're auditing a facility in Europe or in Asia, the time zone differences, cause challenges with remote audits. And I'd say the most important takeaway for us is, as we looked at the corporate audit program and the number of findings per audit, over the last 3 years versus, what with the remote audits, what we realized is that there was about a 20% reduction in just the number of audit findings. And so when we said, okay, well, what is causing the reduction in the average number of findings? Have we gotten better and hence we see the reduced number, or is it something else going on? And I think it was pretty obvious that the reduction would be in the area of production and process controls, because when you don't go to the production floor and look at the actual manufacturing processes, that results in a reduced kind of effectiveness of looking at that very important part, of the quality system or the manufacturing process. So, I think that's one thing that I would highlight as an area of focus. And, in terms of solutions, as I mentioned, there is extensive preparation that goes on in terms of, the front room, back room, like if you're sitting in front of the camera, then I guess you're the front room. In an odd remote assessment like that, having the technical setup, making sure that, how you prepare the, place where you keep documents secure and pass documents, with the volume of documents that are required to be reviewed. So that requires a lot of planning. Scheduling the personnel at different time zones, giving them, so that they don't just sit at their, laptop and waste time. So that also is a lot of pre-planning is required, like, in an on-site inspection. I think the one thing that is challenging that I mentioned is virtual tours. I mean, I know even Dr. Miller mentioned that, there were, early on there were conversations about, can we just, do FaceTime or have somebody wear a GoPro camera and go to the production floor? But then the challenge, remains about security, and could somebody record, that information and having, sensitive information, being recorded. So that remains a challenge, I think, as an industry, and all of us, we need to figure out how best to kind of manage that, in manufacturing review, going to the production floor, and how do you really do a virtual tour and review of manufacturing processes. I mean, communication, remains important, but I think what the pandemic has taught us, working remotely and doing remote inspections, is that the investments in IT infrastructure and bandwidth, having platforms like Zoom and Microsoft Teams have become so important. And I think we all need to continue investing. So in the interest of time, I know everybody is looking forward to the Q&A. I'm just going to stop here.
Excellent. Thank you, Vipul. Okay. Before we move into the Q&A, I'm going to share my screen quickly. And we have a poll, or two quick polls that I was hoping that, let's see if I can find out where the poll is. So if you go to the poll in the I guess the main session area, there's two quick questions. We'd hope you would take a very quick minute and answer these two questions. The first is about what you think REIs will be. Will they be good? Will they be problematic, potentially dangerous? And two, what is your readiness, either your clients, your companies, your site's readiness to support an IRE as they are defined? So maybe take 30 seconds to do that, and then we can get from Daniel what those results are. Daniel, anything coming in?
Yes, I will read the results now. So we had, for the first question, 0% said great for industry, bring it on. 29% helpful, but won't change things all that much. 0% a bit problematic. 14% potentially dangerous, and we're at 57% for not sure, a lot to consider, and I haven't evaluated fully.
Probably makes sense. How about question 2?
For question 2, we have 29% said yes, 17% yes, 22% somewhat, 13% not really, 9% no, and at the highest, 39% unsure.
Okay. So, and any numbers on how many respondents on that? What's the data validity? Okay. All right, we'll move on. All right. So now we can move into the panel discussion, and I'm going to actually stop my share. I certainly have a number of questions that have been framed, asked our clients and professional associates some questions, and they provided some. Does anybody on the panel want to start with any comments on anybody else's presentations or any thoughts that they have? I also have some comments based on, or some questions based on your presentation. So anybody else can get started, or I'll jump in. Go ahead, Elizabeth.
Yeah, I just wanted to, Dr. Schiff, that, one of the points you mentioned is one of the things that we are experiencing, and that is with using our remote regulatory tools. We have identified that evaluation takes actually a much longer time for many of the reasons you noted than actually being on site conducting an inspection. The fact that the attendance at some of these facilities is inconsistent because of work at home policies or because of COVID infections, access to those documents, sometimes it has taken much longer to get that access. That time differences certainly we've experienced when we have foreign facilities where we're doing those remote records requests, as well as, potentially where we had some experience doing remote interactive evaluations. Those have been tricky to schedule, with some FDA people being up late at night and, some of our foreign counterparts being up very early in the morning or vice versa. So I would echo, we are seeing that. And then I think to, the poll, Jack, if you'll grant me some leverage,
Please.
as we did develop that remote interactive evaluation guidance, we met with stakeholders. We received many letters from the pharmaceutical industry, and other stakeholders asking us to consider doing different things with our inspectional activities. And part of that assessment was really to give a lot of deep thought to sort of the state of readiness of those facilities and whether or not they would have the ability. I think some of the challenges we see are things like, particularly in production areas, there's limited Wi-Fi capability. And you'll see, where we're asking to do sort of that live streaming, glitchy connections or loss of connections, loss of audio. So, the infrastructure is a bit of a challenge at this time to do that. And then I'll just mention one more thing, to Kalah, your presentation and to talk about the backlog. It's a real challenge to think of surveillance inspections in the medical product side as kind of a backlog. In the food side, where they have those statutory inspection frequency requirements, that is, one thing where, we are going to see, the backlog grow, just because, there is that statutory mandate. Where we have the ability to do the risk-based inspections and we have the authority under 704A4 in the drug and biologic drug space, we are able to create records requests as a bridge to do and reevaluate our risk inspection. So I like to think of it rather than a backlog as more as how do we get back to steady state and how do we shorten that bridge of time between, when we're looking at information through records requests and potentially remote interactive evaluations, and when we kind of get back to steady state.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Miller. I have a question actually for you and actually the panel to comment on. You had said in your presentation that there have been 1,300 records requests in pharma. And I guess, having seen a lot of inspections in my life and worked with across the table from a lot of FDA investigators and a lot of ex-FDA people as colleagues, inspections are more than just kind of checking the box on a checklist for records and completeness. There's a lot of assessment of trust, a lot of assessment of capability, insight that is really hard to get from a records request or kind of over a Zoom call. And so I guess I'd ask you, what was the agency's response to these 1,300 records requests? I mean, both in how many people provided good, complete responses? Was the information meaningful? Did you feel like with the information review, you were actually robustly executing on your public health protection mission? Any insight into how those records requests went and how the agency felt that it achieved its objectives?
Thank you for that question. And it's a really good question. And I will hearken back to, none of these tools are going to ever supplant the boots on the ground, the knock on the door, being inside of the facility, using all of your senses, being able to do the interviews, being able to look at, records, and then to get the context around those records. So, I do think, however, we have been able to utilize records requests to get really good information and to be able to make regulatory decisions on, the approvability of applications, to make actually decisions that we needed to put products on import alert, to make decisions about, at least 2 warning letters. So, I think the information has provided us with the ability to both, promote and create accessibility to products, as well as, to protect and to be able to ensure that, those products where we don't have the right confidence that, they're not accessible, or that those facilities and firms are put on notice. But, I will say, one of the things we've learned through the pandemic is we need to look at all of our tools, and we need to look at our resources, and we need to use the right tools to get the right outcomes. And, as any agency, any operation, any business, you have limited resources to accomplish what you need to accomplish. And what we're trying to do through the experiences of this public health emergency is identify when we use what tools based upon the information we know about prior compliance history, previous, inspectional history, and all of those things together, because we want to use our resources to get, to be good stewards of, accomplishing our mission and get the right outcomes.
Excellent. Thank you.
Jack, can I ask
Of course.
sort of one question to my fellow panelists? So I'm backing up to that poll for a minute and thinking about, the results there seem to show that people are kind of on the fence, or at least industry's a little bit on the people who replied are on the fence about the value of an RIE and whether it's useful, or remote regulatory assessment, and whether it's useful. That, I think, similar to Elizabeth, has not been my experience in interacting with our clients. We had many clients who were really pushing FDA hard to implement some kind of RIE process, partly because their experience with records requests was that you send your records off and you can't really then interact with FDA. You don't know if they have questions. It's not like when they're, in the facility on the ground and you can provide some context around the records, or you can explain why this SOP has a change. You just send the records off and then you don't know what happens. So our clients actually pushed pretty hard. And I realized that a theoretical remote interactive evaluation is different than actually seeing a guidance that would lay out what the process looks like in a little more detail. But I'm curious to Pool, since you're from industry, if you were faced with the question or with the request from FDA to do an RIE, how would you make that decision about whether whether to participate or not, particularly if it was clear that if you didn't participate, it would be difficult for FDA to make an assessment, and they might actually, have to come out and do an inspection, which may not be possible given where we are now.
No, we kind of realized the predicament, right? As I said, with our own corporate audits, we have similar. So as I said, over the last 3 months, we've had one request for RIE, which we accepted, and we've had 3 requests for RRAs, and we accepted 2 of them. One was in February, and at the time I think there were still questions, and we weren't quite sure, so we declined. But I think that the 2 recent ones we have accepted. In fact, one of them has started already, right? And it was from the time we accepted to the time the assessment date was set was very short. So I was kind of impressed by the fact that it started so quickly. So, but I do agree that in a big multinational corporation, the decision to accept or not is not as straightforward sometimes, right? It does require internal discussion and between operations and all of the folks that need to participate. So I think as we gain more experience and more comfort with with these regulatory assessments, and I think the industry, the fear will get reduced over time. I think it's just too new right now.
So as a follow-up to that, kind of follow-up, Kalah, and to your comments, Vipul and Elizabeth, one of the things I think is challenging, and certainly this is understandable given the public emergency that we're currently in, and the need to move quickly in for FDA to essentially address this gap in its oversight role. So notwithstanding that, thinking about the future and thinking about the end of this emergency, does the panel feel that FDA either should or needs to get additional and more clear statutory authority on these sorts of modern inspection approaches, both at a statutory level and possibly through notice and comment rulemaking? And I'll add to that even things like taking pictures is more court-defined as far as limits than through statutory provisions under FDCA. So when you're thinking about the extrapolation from, whether you can take pictures to interactive evaluations, possibly recording of videos, electronic review of potentially applications, it seems to me like the gap is only growing bigger and the need and maybe the expectations are getting greater. So any comments on the need for additional statutory authority or notice comment rulemaking instead of a guidance?
My initial thought on that is that it's too early to ask for statutory authority at this point. I think we need more experience with how these work, particularly the RIEs and some of the video technology. And, I know there are lots of questions about photos and whether videos are like photos and how that can, be handled. But if I put my former kind of FDA policy hat on, I don't think we have enough information right now to know how these are going to work and whether sort of what the problems are, both legal and otherwise. And it's hard to write a statute. If I put my former Senate help hat on, it's hard to write a statute if you don't know exactly what you're writing it for. So I would not recommend additional statutory authority at this point, which doesn't mean that in the future you may not need one, in the next UFA rounds of negotiations or potentially before that. But I think now is not the right time.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree that I think it's a little too early, and also depends on whether the pandemic lasts for the next 6 months, hopefully, or whether this goes on, right? As countries like India, are struggling, like whether this is going to come to an end soon or this becomes kind of the norm going forward. Hopefully not, but I do agree that it's a little premature.
So kind of a follow-up question. In the resiliency roadmap, there was a slight mention on that topic. But one of the things I didn't see mentioned is the possibility of the agency going to Congress or going to the administration for additional resources and this assuming that we can get back on site and on-site inspections, to essentially help reduce the backlog. Because even prior to the emergency, we were struggling to some extent, and that's one of the reasons for FDLI and the records request to address, in particular, the ex-US supply chains. And this may be to Kalah from a, your Washington view hat, probably easier for you to answer than Elizabeth. But certainly, Elizabeth, you're open to respond. And to Pool, does the agency need even interim, short-term resources in addition to possibly other tools to address this backlog and to get back on track and to achieve its oversight objectives for public health?
Two thoughts on that. One is, there are, at least in the meeting notes that I've seen from the user fee discussions, FDA has asked for at least some additional resources on inspection-related stuff, and in turn has made some additional commitments about timelines and things like that. So that's my first thought, is that they are asking for additional resources. There was also some of the stimulus funding that went toward FDA that I think is being put towards inspectional use. And then third, it's hard for FDA itself to advocate for money, but I'm sure they would never say no to additional funding for any program area, including for inspections. To Elizabeth's point previously about the backlog, sort of not thinking of it as a backlog, but thinking of how to use those alternative tools and looking at the whole kind of array of tools that they have. Resources are important, but they've actually done, to give credit to the agency, an amazing job in a very difficult time over the last year plus in continuing to meet user fee goal dates and really pivoting at the drop of a hat to keep our medical products safe.
I couldn't agree more. And maybe, my thank you, Elizabeth, to you and the agency for this period. I mean, I think it was Herculean. So personally, very gratified what you folks have done. We've had some questions come in from the audience. Quick one. Will the RIE data be available publicly? Will observations be available via FOIA request?
So I guess I'll start with that. I think too many of my panelists kind of, we are still really grappling and discussing, how we're going to take those outcomes, how we're going to use them, to apply to inspectional histories and how we will, take those issues we find, and, make them transparent, communicating them back to the facility, but then, making sure that, the public has a good way of understanding, how we're doing our job as an oversight body. So I think, it's still under consideration. We're still working, internally, and we'll continue to engage our stakeholders on, some of the best ways forwards here as we garner more experience with this program.
Okay, thank you. Another one from the audience for the Pool. You said there's a debate in your company about whether or not to allow an RRA or an REI since they're voluntary. The question asks, how do you decide whether or not to allow an RRA or an REI within your organization?
I think, I would be honest in saying that we don't have the entire logic kind of, figured out, because it's just, it's a new process that are still, the industry doesn't have enough experience, right? So in some ways we are making decisions under some assumptions, right? But in general, I think our bias is, to say yes, because, if the agency needs to inspect the facility, I think it's only a question of time, right? I mean, if, so whether it's remote or on site, you're probably only delaying the inevitable, right? So I would say the bias is, going to be yes. But yeah, I think it's probably, as I said, once we have a little more experience, as I said, 2 of our sites will go through, and as we get more experience, I think we'll understand better our decision making around this.
I think we have time for one more question, and I'm going to ask it. These REIs are voluntary, and so you give consent, and I think the term is agreement in the guidance. Can consent be withdrawn at any point during the RIE, and are there implications to that withdrawal? And I'm not directing this to Elizabeth, so I'll direct it to both Kalah and Vipul, because I think we probably all have similar understanding of the mandatory nature or lack thereof of guidances. Maybe what are the risks there, and do you think that's good advice to do that if you've accepted? Anybody?
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Elizabeth.
I was just going to say, I mean, as you indicated, I mean, these are voluntary activities, and we can't compel a facility to create a record, right? Or, so if they decide to consent and then they choose to withdraw or have interruption of their bandwidth, it's up to the facility. And I think one of the reasons we're doing this is we're really trying to make, a pathway forward to have access to innovative medical products, to food, to all of these things. So, it's not like we're out there trying to do a gotcha. We've carefully thought about, the information we could be getting as we're doing these live streaming and commercial confidential, trade secret, so there's a lot of considerations that went into this. So, I don't think, there's going to be a hammer if somebody decides to withdraw consent, but, we're really trying to do this, to advance our shared mission of creating access to safe, effective products.
Final words, Kalah, Vipul, quick, 5 seconds, anything?
I was just going to say that I would agree with Elizabeth that these are voluntary. So of course you could withdraw consent at any time you wanted to. But again, it's going to be a calculus because, as Elizabeth said, these are all meant to provide information to both the agency sort of and the public writ large about the safety of medical products. So to the extent it's possible to do that, I would encourage firms to do so.
Yeah. I would say that together I think we need to work on a best practice. I think this is inevitable that as pandemic has taught us, right? We need to be prepared for situations like this, and I think we'll learn together. Saving so much time in traveling and all that, we see the benefits of that, right? So if we can figure this out, I think this will only be beneficial to everybody.
Okay, we'll leave it at that. FDLI is having a webinar in June on the same topic with a different set of panelists. Kathy Burgess, I believe, is from Alston Bird, is moderating. We could have, I think, 15 of these sessions and still have questions on these related topics. So my thanks to Dr. Miller, Vipul Sheth, Kalah Auchincloss, and Daniel Zinn. My apologies for the snafu on the introductions. And it's been my pleasure to be here with you this afternoon. Thank you all, and I hope you enjoyed the session.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all for joining us and sharing your knowledge with those very informative presentations. If you'll join us now, we're going to have topical facilitated discussions going on for the next half hour.